Lisa Nandy, Shadow Levelling Up Secretary, Labour MP for Wigan, elected in 2010. Normally we do these interviews down in London. You insisted we come to your constituency, so thank you for getting us out of London. It's an amazing ground here. Why was it so important for us to do it here?
God, you make me sound like a right drama queen, insisting that everyone comes to Wigan. But, well, I live here, and I wanted you to be here in particular because we're sitting at the DW Stadium, where home to Wigan Athletic and Wigan Warriors, our rugby league club. It was this club, Wigan Athletic, 10 years ago to this very day that took us all the way to Wembley, where we defeated Manchester City and won the FA Cup. It was one of the best days that Wigan has ever had, that I've ever had. 10 years ago, I was sitting at Wembley Stadium, Wigan on tour, all of us out there, and I wanted you to see it because this is the thing that has shaped my politics. It shaped who I am. It's shaped why and driven why I'm in politics. The people of this town are the most incredible people. They work hard. They have no time for some of the nonsense that goes on in Westminster. And I just really wanted you to be here to feel it and absorb it and to show it to all of your viewers, because this is what matters, not the pantomime that goes on in Westminster.
It's interesting what you've said about your constituency, and the reason why I find it interesting is because we got elected at the same time and we became friends. Had never met each other before we found ourselves in Parliament together, and I think we became friends largely because we didn't really like the House of Commons. We felt quite uncomfortable. It felt very strange to us. We were much happier when we were back in our constituencies. Have you made peace? It's 13 years since that election. I left the last election. Have you made peace with Westminster? Do you now get it? 'Cause you're good at it. Do you like the House of Commons more than you did?
So I've always liked the bit where you debate, the real debates, not the show like PMQs that's just there for the cameras, but the real debates. I've always liked that. And you don't see a lot of that on the telly, but you know, you often you learn stuff from people, and you learn stuff from people who've got a completely different perspective from you, who've had different experiences. I learn lots of stuff from the other side. I'm from my own side, and I often change my mind as a result. So that bit of it, that bit of it I really like. The rest of it I just find really difficult. It's getting off the train on a, Wednesday evening, if I can make it earlier, if I can get away with it here. It feels like stepping into a different world from Westminster. The stuff that seems to matter there, it's so disconnected to what people are dealing with here, and it has been for 13 years, and none of that gap has really closed. I think, for me, that's been the mission of my 13 years in politics, is to try and take what is happening to people in places like Wigan and drag it into the Westminster bubble and force people to confront it. You remember those Brexit years, and after the referendum and all these calls for a second referendum, people here just thought we'd gone absolutely mad.
We had.
All of us. Well, yeah, we had. You'd walk around the House of Commons and you couldn't shake the feeling that people had completely lost the plot. That gap just hasn't got smaller in those intervening years, and so no, I find it really difficult still.
Is Keir Starmer on something then? Because he said this week, the public don't care about these woke issues. They don't care about woke. They don't go, have these conversations. Might happen in the media or whatever, but like in places like Wigan, in fact anywhere else, outside of maybe media land, no one's having those chats. Is he right on that?
I couldn't agree with him more. I was almost relieved when he said it, like someone had broken the spell. They're people who care about people in their community. We've got people going through gender recognition here in Wigan. I talked a lot about one of the young girls that's going through it here at the moment, and they care about the fact that those people are being demonised. It's not nice. We're kind to asylum seekers here when they arrive. We give them a proper Wigan welcome. One of my local charities was telling me the other day that one of the problems that they have is that people are really generous here and they donate a lot, but they donate the sort of food that we eat in Wigan. So there's a lot of pies, a lot of Christmas puddings, that sort of stuff around Christmas. And a lot of the asylum seekers are like, they've never seen this sort of food before and they don't know what to do with it. But it's when people try and whip up all this sort of woke stuff and these culture wars, honestly, people in this town just think they've gone absolutely mad. And they won't have it. They just won't have it. They won't have it from us. They won't have it from the Conservatives. And I just think Keir was so right to call it out, because it's just absolute rubbish. And it's part of that disconnect between politics and people. People here are talking about, there's long waits to get an ambulance out, and you often find yourself queuing then to get into A&E. People are really, really worried about this sort of stuff at the moment. And any government that is fit to govern has to just fix the basics and take care of the basics, stop messing around.
You stood to be Labour leader at that last leadership election, which started right after that general election defeat in 2019. Obviously, you didn't win, but it takes.
I remember. Thanks.
It takes guts to put yourself forward for a position like that. Most of us wouldn't dream of doing so because it's hard. What was the hardest part for you about going through that contest?
I think you're right that it does take a lot of confidence to be able to do it. I'd never have done it if there wasn't a really compelling reason why I thought I had to. It's not that I thought I've got to be the leader of the Labour Party, nobody else could do it. But at that time, we'd gone through this horrendous period where we'd become completely disconnected from the people who we built and founded the Labour Party with and for. People who felt, not just really disrespected by what had happened during Brexit, but also, we'd gone through a period where we moved to the extremes in the party, where we were promising the earth to people who are incredibly grounded and realistic and could see that we had no ability to pay for it. They were worried about whether they could trust us with their money. It's their money and they haven't got a lot of it. They were worried about whether they could trust us to stand up for them in any circumstance, but particularly when we had the attack on the streets of Salisbury from the Putin government, and people really thought that we were siding with Putin over the British people. I mean, it was horrendous. I didn't come into politics to represent another political party. Labour is their home, and we'd taken that away from them. And I wanted to show them that we got it. And I thought, if we go into that contest saying we got it all right, Corbyn 10 out of 10, Brexit 10 out of 10, we just need to plough on and do more of the same, I thought that would be the end of the Labour Party. I thought we'd die and we would deserve to. And so I stood to give those people a voice, so that when they looked at that contest, they would know that there was somebody who was prepared to stand up and fight for them and their right to have the party that they built and founded back, representing them again in British politics. Now, I didn't win, you're right, and thank you very much for that very depressing reminder. But actually, in a lot of ways, I feel that the job was done, because when we started that contest, I was the only person on that stage saying those things, and by the end of that contest I stood with Keir and Becky, who I came to like a lot and respect and become good friends with throughout the course of the contest, and we were all saying it, and I thought, that's it, that's what I had to do.
When you're in a contest like that, you obviously go home at night, you're standing in front of members during the day, but you go home and you've got time to think. Is it dark? Are there dark moments where you think, why am I doing this? Why am I putting myself through this?
Well, I think the bigger issue is that I didn't go home. I mean, you just go out on the, you go out, you announce you're doing it, you go out of the house and you don't really come back for months. And we do long leadership contests in the Labour Party. We like a long leadership contest. I don't think the public like it that much, but we do. And so it went on for a really long time. And I wasn't at home. It was difficult. My little boy was very little at the time and just didn't understand where his mum was. But then COVID hit and suddenly it all stopped, and that was equally surreal because we were still in the contest, but we were all sitting in our houses. So it was just a very weird time.
So many women, like yourself, have stood for the leadership of the Labour Party. None of them have come close. I sort of feel ridiculous. I'm stumbling because I think, how many times I've said, do you think there ever will be a woman leader of the Labour Party? Because it is literally now absurd, isn't it?
Well, it's pretty existential for us, I think, because with a party that was, I joined the Labour Party as much because I believe in equality and against discrimination, as because I want to fight poverty and because I believe and know that this country can be better. And so it's a huge deal for us, of course it is. And I think there will be a leader at some point who's a woman, but I think there's a problem, and I think that I've got a bit of an insight into it, having been through that experience and also been encouraged by lots of the women who'd stood before, very good women, who never made it. I think the problem is that when people look for the next leader of the Labour Party, they've got in their mind a view about what that is based on what it's always been. I felt that very much when I went for selection here in Wigan in 2010. We'd never had a woman MP here in the whole history of parliamentary democracy. And people were looking for the next MP. They were looking for the next guy, the next older guy who could do it. And I think that was the problem, actually. There were a lot of members who said to me, you don't look like a Prime Minister, you don't look like a leader of the Labour Party. And I knew exactly what they meant. And it's depressing. But the young women in particular won't have it. And there are lots of young women in our party now who are starting to change the game. And they're not just changing how they vote, but there are also perceptions of what a leader should be and should look like and how they should behave. But they're also changing their parents' views and their grandparents' views. And so I think that's changing. I think it's shifting, but it takes more women at the top of politics. That's why, I mean, you and I have talked about this before, but I have such admiration for people like Tessa Jowell, who was my mentor when I first got elected, and the women who blazed that trail, because without them, I don't think I'd be doing this. And I think for my generation, that's what we've got to do. We've got to hand this on in a better state so that at some point, and you know, I want us to win the next general election. I want us to be in power for long enough to sort out the very real problems that this country's got. But at some point in my lifetime, we've got to have a woman in that role.
Do you think maybe the male colleagues should say, I'm going to sit this next one out? Whenever that is, might be a decade, it might be 5, we don't know what's going to happen at the next election, we don't know how long Keir Starmer is going to be leader, but however long it is, should the male MPs who've got their ambitions say, I'm going to sit this one out because that's the only way we're going to get a woman?
Well, I think people have just got to start voting for women. I mean, we've seen it a bit in Parliament. We've had this thing recently where we realised that a lot of the chairs of select committees, which are elected by all MPs, so not just parties, but all MPs come together and elect. And we realised that we'd never had a woman chairing the Treasury Select Committee, we'd never had a woman chairing the Business Committee. So a lot of us just decided, well, if there's a woman on the ballot, I'm going to vote for her. And people said, well, that's nonsense because, you've got to vote for the best person for the job. But we got Nicky Morgan chairing the Treasury Select Committee, we've got Rachel Reeves doing Bays, we had the Business Committee, we had Yvette Cooper doing Home Affairs. You can't tell me that there are men better than them in Parliament. They're top of their game, they're really good. And it's what, can't tell me that there's never been a woman before me that was good enough to represent Wigan. It's just that people didn't vote for it. The public will, but the problem is more that the perception within political parties is that the public won't wear it. Well, they will. We've seen it. We've had lots of women prime ministers now. And I think we've just got to vote for women.
OK. Right, let's do a bit more personal. So your dad, he's called Deepak. He is he's Indian. And he married your white mum.
Yeah.
This was in 1972. So
you know more about my family history than I do.
A very different
weird.
A very different time of race relations in this country. They must have gone through it.
I mean, it was pretty. It wasn't completely unknown at that time, but it was pretty unusual. My mum says she's still got some of the letters, actually. People wrote her letters, because it's in the days when I think people still do this sometimes, but you would announce in the newspaper you were getting married, and people wrote to her and said, think of your children, you can't do this. It was, more sort of kindly concern than anything else, but it was very, very real and very prevalent. And she tells a story about when they went to buy a house and they were moving to Manchester and they looked around she'd gone up first to look for houses, seen lots of lovely houses, gone back and said to my dad, this is great. They were moving from London, so, really excited they could buy an actual house that they could afford. And they went back with my dad, and the estate agent said, I'm afraid we haven't got anything to show you at the moment. And there was a lot of that. It was what led my dad into the race relations world. He was an academic, he was an English lecturer, but he, if you can't go to the pub with your wife without staging a sit-in, you have to get involved. And so he did, and he got involved in race relations, and he fought those fights all his life.
So interesting talking to you, because whenever I try to get to a personal question, you sort of move it to somebody else. What does being half Indian mean to you?
It's important to me. It's part of my identity. There's lots of bits of my identity that matter to me. I'm a Manc by birth. I'm a Wiganer by choice. I'm half Indian and very proud of it. I've been to India a few times. I don't claim to be a sort of expert on the culture, but I'm proud of it. And I think, being mixed race, growing up mixed race in the 1980s, did shape me a lot. It was never ever an issue in Manchester where I was growing up. I grew up in Manchester and then later in Lancashire. And it was never an issue. It was an issue in national politics, and I remember that. I remember lots of Conservative politicians in particular talking about how people like my dad were coming into the country and we were being swamped. I remember the stuff they had to say about single mums, because my parents divorced and I had two very loving parents, but I lived in a one-parent household, and I remember how much we absorbed that as a kid, as kids. That I remember once walking out the door with my breakfast all down my jumper as usual, and my mum saying to me, "You can't do that, we can't do that, we have to be better than that because people are looking at us." And it was always there. And so I think that is partly why I'm in politics, because I knew that the country was better than that, because my friends were better than that, our community was better than that. And sometimes I see some of these young England footballers and the stuff they have to put up with, but how amazing they are and how they look like the Britain that that team looks like the Britain that I know and understand. And I think this country could be so amazing if we had a government that was as good as the people in it.
All right. Okay. Final question. You're a mum. You've got an 8-year-old son. Are you strict?
God, no, I'm terrible. So, because I'm a bit, well, you know this, but I try to be very professional, but I'm a bit of a kid and I like to have fun. And so I am not the disciplined person in our house. I'm often the person that's being told off as well. We got him a Nintendo Switch during the pandemic, more as a way to keep us sane than to entertain him, to be honest. And I was on it so much that in the end I had to get my own because it was causing rows in the house. It's every evening my husband will come in and say, "Just both of you get off the Switch." So no, I'm probably not. Oh God, this is awful. I'm going to get people writing in saying you're a terrible mother.
No, I think that's a really endearing story.
Going back to play on my Switch now.
You made me wait 2 years for this interview.
And you can see why, because you ask me questions like that.
Delightful. Thank you, Lisa Nandy.
Thank you.
Thank you.